There are dreams, and then there are moments when a dream bleeds so forcefully into waking life that it feels as though reality itself has been invaded. I was lying on my back and I could not move. I did not exactly hear anything, but I could feel a sickening laughter wash over me in waves, emanating from the closet. Suddenly something hurled a human head at me and it landed on my chest, face up. It was the face of a girl I had known in high school. Up until that point I had been terrified but somehow holding myself together. After that I lost control. I could not scream. All I could produce were guttural grunts and moans. I writhed and strained, trying to rock from side to side to get it off me, but I could not move. This seemed to last another minute or two before I truly woke up. The trauma of that episode lingered. For weeks afterward I would wake and be afraid that I was not really awake, that something terrible could happen at any second. Even now, when I remember that laugh, my skin crawls. At the time I had never heard of sleep paralysis or night terrors. I thought I was losing my mind. I have experienced sleep paralysis 3 times in my life. The first 2 episodes were simply the terror of waking and being unable to move. The third time was very different. I woke very early in the morning, probably between 5 and 6, when the sun was just beginning to rise. There was barely any light in the room. I tried to move, but the now familiar paralysis and helplessness held me in place. My eyes fixed on the wall. I could do nothing. Then I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs to my bedroom. It was my brother, followed by my sister, my father, and my mother. They were sobbing hysterically, and every one of them seemed at least a foot taller than normal. Their heights were unnerving. The 4 of them approached my bed and then stopped, towering over me, each of them crying. I could not move. I wanted to shout for help or demand that they stop because the sight terrified me, their immense size, their crying faces. Then, as suddenly as they had arrived, all 4 turned and walked back down the stairs. I could move again. I ran down to follow them, but they were not in the common area. I went to each of their rooms. All 4 of them were fast asleep. My heart raced. The most surreal and unnerving thing had just happened to me. I had to lean against the wall to gather my thoughts. I breathed heavily and found that falling back asleep was impossible for the rest of the night. A few days later I was struck by a speeding car while crossing the road with friends. I ended up with 3 broken bones and a fractured femur. I was hospitalized for a week. At one point all 4 of my family members stood next to my hospital bed, looking down at me. My mother was emotional and crying. The image was almost identical to the one from my sleep paralysis episode. I'm not superstitious, but if I were, I would be tempted to believe that the dream was some kind of sign or a prediction of the future. Writing that sentence now gives me chills. There was another night when I had been out late drinking with friends in the summer of 2016. We were walking around town when one of my friends pointed at someone hiding in a bush. We walked a little closer. We could barely make out a figure crouched there. When we approached, a bizarre, off-putting sound came from the bush. We screamed and laughed and ran away. It had been both frightening and strangely comical in the moment. I assumed the person in the bush was just messing with passerby. Because I had been drinking, I fell asleep easily that night. The next thing I remember was waking to near-pitch darkness in my room and realizing I could not move. I could not look at the clock because my body would not obey. I was in a state of sleep paralysis. I began to hear the same strange noise we had heard coming from the bush. Then I looked straight ahead toward the foot of my bed and saw something that was pure nightmare fuel. At first it appeared to be a floating, grotesque, demonic head. As it approached, I realized it had a body that blended into the darkness of the room. Its mouth hung open and it kept making that familiar noise, inching closer until it was mere inches from my face. Then, suddenly, it faded away. I was able to scream and regain movement. I sat panting and checked my room with the lamp on. The demonic figure was gone. I told my parents about it the next day. They agreed that the episode was sleep paralysis, though neither had ever heard of anyone seeing anything like that before. The experience had felt impossibly real, not a dream, but an awake nightmare that left its footprints on the day. All of these episodes share a theme. The boundary between dreaming and waking becomes porous, and something from the dream world reaches through. The sensations are visceral, the paralysis, the sounds, the faces at the edge of vision, and they do not feel like mere images. They feel like contact. They leave a residue of unease that can linger for days or weeks. Has anyone ever experienced sleep paralysis? I assure you, it is one of the strangest, most fascinating, and at the same time most terrifying things a person can go through. It is the sensation of waking up yet being unable to move. Your senses and awareness remain intact, but you feel as though you exist in a half-asleep, half-awake state. I had heard stories about it long before it happened to me, but when it finally occurred, everything changed. I have experienced it only once, and it happened while I was in college. At that time my life was going through an incredibly difficult phase. It was finals week and I was under extreme stress. I was not getting much sleep. It must have been the night before my last final. I remained awake until late because I was studying biology all night. I do not remember exactly when I decided to try to sleep, only that everything blurred and then there was darkness. The next thing I remember is being in my room, lying in my bed, but there was a strange haziness to my awareness. I felt awake yet weak. When I attempted to move, I could not. I could only move my eyes to look around the dark room. At one point I glanced to one side and then back toward the center of the room, and there she was, a woman standing directly in front of the bed. She faced me, wearing a black dress and holding some long objects in her hands. I wanted to call out, "Mom," but paralysis prevented me. I could not speak. The woman approached, knelt down, and touched my forehead. I could feel the touch. She was eye to eye with me, and when I looked at her face I saw my mother's face. I tried to call Mom again desperately, but I was trapped inside my own body. She stood up, walked to the doorway, and disappeared into the house. I lay there, unable to move, for perhaps another 10 to 20 seconds. Then my vision cleared and my thinking became sharper. I was able to sit up. I leapt out of bed screaming "Mom" over and over. I ran into the hallway yelling her name. A door opened down the hall and someone came to hug me, but it was not my mother, it was my father. He told me that he missed her too. My mother had died 3 weeks before this happened. Dreams are strange and beautiful in how vague and bizarre they can be. They place you in a separate world where things that make no sense can feel perfectly natural. But when that unreality crosses over into the real world, the experience becomes much more disturbing. On another occasion, I was in REM sleep, having a bizarre nightmare in which I was being followed by some strange creature through the middle of a dark forest. The dream began to blur and I partially woke up. I say partially because although I was back in my bed, I could not move any part of my body. I began to hear a faint, strange sound, a noise that was robotic yet somehow alive. It repeated every 3 seconds, growing louder each time. It felt as though the sound was drawing nearer. It became unbearably loud inside my head and I wanted to scream, but I could not. My eyes locked onto the crack in the closet door, which I never leave open. Through the crack appeared the distorted face of a man, his mouth unnaturally wide in a grotesque smile. Each time the sound occurred it felt as though the closet and that face inched closer. Then the closet door slammed shut and everything went silent. I regained control of my body shortly thereafter, and the very first thing I did, despite being 24 years old, was run to my parents' room to get my father to check the closet with me. There was nothing in the closet or anywhere else in my room. My father told me that what I had experienced was sleep paralysis and that he had been through it once as well. That explanation did little to ease the disturbance of the experience. I'm not alone in this. Years ago, another person described a sleep paralysis episode in which they were certain that something evil resided in their closet. They also knew on some level that they were dreaming and they tried to confront their fear. They avoided looking directly at the closet door, but whenever they moved their eyes their head would turn away on its own. No matter how hard they tried to resist, their gaze kept being drawn to that spot. Eventually they woke up in a cold sweat. At first they felt relieved, believing it was over, but then they realized that the illusion had left a residue that lingered. Sleep paralysis opens a door between conscious and unconscious states, where dream elements reach into waking life and where waking reality is echoed by dream images. It is a strange, terrifying, and unforgettable experience.